So welcome to this webinar. My name is Tanja Müller. I'm professor of political sociology at GDI, and I also lead the research group on migration, refugees, and asylum. And this webinar introduces a new research project that's sort of attached to this group. So the project deals with navigating crises, Turkey's migration policies in the face of refugee challenges and disaster response. It's led by Professor Tim Jacobi, who is here and may wave to everybody so that we know who he is, and Dr. Ibrahim Efe. Ibrahim, also, if you would like to wave for those who don't know you. So Ibrahim is a research fellow here at GDI for the project. His research focuses on migration governance, refugee integration, and the socio-political impact of migration policies, with a particular emphasis on the Middle East. Currently, he's analyzing the interactions between NGOs, the state, and local actors in Turkey's refugee management system. So the project at the center of these talks explores this dynamic of migration policy implementation in Turkey and focuses particularly on Syrian refugees and the collaboration between key policy stakeholders. If you want to have more information on the project, if you go to the GDI website and under our research group, you'll find a whole explanation there. It will be mainly Dr. Ibrahim who will present the project, and Professor Jacobi will sort of pitch in if required. Ibrahim is going to talk for around 20 plus minutes. We have a Q&A session after that, so you preferably can raise your hand and ask your question verbally. If not, you can put it in the chat and I'll read it out. And as I said, if you would turn on your video after the presentation, that'd be super. So the floor is yours, Ibrahim. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Tanya, for the introduction, and good afternoon, everyone. Today, I want to walk you through our research project, its scope, its background, and what we aim to accomplish. I will be mainly focusing on Turkey's migration management with a particular emphasis on post-disaster period. So this presentation will cover 5 themes. First, I will look at Turkey's role in international migration briefly. Then I will share with you the 5 phases of managing Syrian refugees in Turkey. And also, I will provide a short recap of the organizational structure of migration management in Turkey. And also, I will try to provide a short recap of what happened during and after the earthquake. And I will be finally talking about our project. So to start with Turkey's role as a transit and host country in the Middle East, it's a very contentious topic, actually, because until recently, Turkey was depicted mostly by Western literature as a transit country and a country of immigration. But it is definitely on the Eastern Mediterranean migration route, making it one of the 5 major global pathways for irregular migration. But also it has been receiving millions of refugees recently. But before that, displaced people from Iraq and surrounding conflict-ridden regions also sought refuge in Turkey. And also, European tourists have been settling in Turkey recently. Also, international students make up some share of that migration group in Turkey. So, in a way, Turkey still acts as a transit corridor from the Middle East to Europe, but that doesn't really explain the whole story, because Turkey is also a destination country, and currently it hosts around 2.8 million Syrian refugees, which represents a decrease from 3.7 million in 2021, and I will explain this drop in the following pages. Turkey operates a dual asylum system with respect to its legal frameworks for Syrians and other asylum seekers. And if you look at the chart, this chart explains the number of Syrian refugees who are under temporary protection in Turkey throughout the years. The first group of Syrian refugees began to come to Turkey in March 2011 in small numbers. And there was a sharp increase, a peak starting from 2013 and up to 2015. And this peak in numbers can be accounted for by the effect of Russian involvement in the Syrian civil war, as well as the emergence of Daesh, and also other political and economical factors that sort of increased the number of Syrian refugees who sought refuge in Turkey. And another interesting trend in this chart can be seen starting from 2021 up to now, which is a decrease in the number of Syrian refugees. And this can be explained by many reasons, but the earthquake was one of the main factors that led to the decrease in the number of Syrian refugees. So Turkey's approach to Syrian refugee crisis has evolved significantly over the years, and we have identified mainly 5 different phases, and these phases roughly illustrate the transformation that the Turkish refugee regime has gone through. The timeline was developed by us using some political and legal developments, as well as some significant political events. But some periods might overlap. I mean, there are not definitive, very rigid time borderlines between the periods, but this periodization roughly gives us an idea of how the Syrian refugee regime in Turkey has evolved. So to start with the first phase of Turkey's response to Syrian refugee crisis, in the early years of the Syrian crisis, Turkey adopted an open door policy, letting all Syrian refugees cross the border. And of course, the United Nations was also collaborating with Turkish Interior Ministry. At that time, there was no institute or no ministry which took control of migration in Turkey. So everything was very securitized, and due to the ongoing war, Turkey, in a way, had to open its doors and accept everyone fleeing violence in Syria. And a temporary protection system was devised, inspired by the European Union's temporary protection acquis, and it was introduced in October 2011 to offer collective protection, but also it limited access to individual asylum procedures. Syrian refugees cannot apply for refugee status today, so they're under temporary protection. Under the Geneva Convention, which Turkey is a part to, only those people flying from wars in Europe can apply for refugee status, meaning that Turkey didn't remove the geographical limitation. So Syrian refugees are still under temporary protection, and this was introduced back in 2011. So overall, the early response focused on emergency relief. Lots of camps were established by the border in collaboration with the AFAD, the disaster response unit of Turkish government. Also, public support was initially strong, and the government discourse on Syrian refugees, which referred to the migration of Prophet from Mecca to Medina, provided a strong base for this acceptance. So the government and the representatives called the Syrian refugees as muhajirin, meaning those who took refuge, and they referred to Turkish people as Ensar, meaning those who are hosting refugees. So the crisis was alleviated to an extent thanks to this approach. And of course, there was this political projection that the war would be over soon and Syrians would go back. So this political optimism affected the early phase in which policies were sort of more flexible, and there was actually an ad hoc policy in a way. Let me go to the second one. In the second phase, Turkey shifted from an ad hoc response to a more structured approach. as the number of Syrian refugees increased. Turkey still maintained an open door policy, granting access to healthcare, education, welfare, and labor markets. But this was very limited in this initial phase. And in this period, the most significant development was the development of the legal framework. The law on foreigners and international protection was established. It was put in force in 2014, but the beginnings of this law actually dates back to the beginning of the 2000, when Turkey was negotiating with the EU for its membership, and it lacked a clear migration system. So the EU required Turkish officials to develop a civil, first of all, and a clear migration policy. So this law, actually, the establishment of this law overlapped with Turkey's EU bid. Also, temporary protection was clarified further by different regulations. And I have already mentioned that these were mostly inspired by the EU policies. Around 23 camps were built, and these camps housed 250,000 Syrians. But by 2018, only 6% of the whole refugee community lived in camps. Turkey followed a policy to close all camps throughout the process. And as you all know, this period also coincides with the emergence, with the escalation of violence in Syria, with the emergence of Daesh and Shabiha, supported by Iran, who together persecuted thousands of people in Syria. And due to these security concerns, from 2016 onwards, border controls tightened. And actually, with the support of EU funding, the new border walls were erected alongside the border. And crossings were restricted at times, and new visa rules were introduced for Syrians. And another significant event in this period was the EU-Turkey deal, the readmission deal. Also, the foundation of deal was established back in 2013, and it was put into force in 2016. And Turkey agreed to control migration to the EU in exchange for some financial aid and some political concessions. And in the next phase, Turkey recognized basically the long-term presence of Syrian refugees. So the policy approach shifted from an humanitarian one to an integration one. And the emergency situation was left behind. I think this is not really true, because there's still an emergency, but the policy approach turned towards more sustainable policies, because the education, especially the education programs introduced in this process, meant that the Turkish actors understood the importance of accepting the permanence of Syrian refugees, at least some of them. So Syrian children in this period were gradually integrated into Turkish education system, who had been accepted into temporary education centers earlier. But since the political actors in Turkey decided that this was a wrong decision, they closed down all temporary education centers, and Syrian students were gradually integrated into Turkish public schools, starting from nurseries up to tertiary education. And also, thanks to the support of EU funding and other international organizations, Turkish language support was provided for Syrian refugees, mostly at universities. For example, the university I worked in before, Kilisye University, had a language teaching center dedicated to Syrian students only. So this aimed to improve the integration of Syrian young people, especially into social life and education system of Turkey. But also there was some there are still some lifelong education centers that provide this language support to Syrian refugees. And in the fourth phase, we can talk about an increasing tension between the host community and the Syrian refugee community, and this is reflected in the political arena as well. In 2018, Ümit Özdağ, who is the leader of a far nationalist party in Turkey, fell out with the main nationalist party, the MHP in Turkey, and he established his own political party called the Victory Party, claiming that the Nationalist Party, who is in coalition with the ruling AKP, doesn't really defend the rights of Turkish people vis-a-vis the problems that were brought about by the presence of Syrian refugees. So he followed this very anti-refugee policy, very anti-refugee and far-right discourse, most of the time demonizing Syrian refugees. And he also achieved some success in the 2019 local elections and later in 2023 general elections. He secured 5% of the general votes, which was not, of course, which wouldn't be a surprise for European public, but in Turkey this was a surprise because for the first time in history there was an anti-refugee party, a nationalist party, whose main policy was to kick Syrian refugees out of country. So alongside this rise of anti-immigrant sentiment, there were some policy adjustments as well. It was not only Ümit Özdağ's Victory Party, which understood the necessity of addressing the issue. Even the ruling party and the main opposition party, CHP, they also had to address the refugee issue to alleviate the concerns of their constituencies. So there became a new policy shift from integration to voluntary returns. And this was also supported by the EU policymakers as well. And by that time, Turkey conducted some over-border operations, military operations, after which it claimed to secure some areas of northern Syria where Syrian refugees could return. And also, apart from these developments, there was economic pressure on the government to address the concerns of the voters. The rising inflation, first of all, and the unemployment levels fueled further public resentment, leading to stricter regulations. And in this period, most of the meetings I attended in Ankara throughout this period dealt with the border policies. So previously, the meetings I had attended were about how to integrate Syrian refugees into Turkish society, but starting with especially the local election, 2019 local election, when the ruling party lost Istanbul to the opposition party, there became a new phase, and in this phase, the policies focused on the voluntary return of Syrian refugees, and stricter regulations were established to stop Syrian refugees moving within the country, and also to sort of alleviate the public concerns that Syrian refugees are creating an economic burden on the country. And the last phase can be started with the fall of Assad regime, after which the voluntary return policies came to mean that they can be actually actualized. So Turkey accelerated in this period return policies, citing both the improved security in Syria and also the fall of Assad regime, which was one of the conditions of Syrian refugees to go back to Turkey. So if you look at various studies by Murat Erdoğan and also some conducted by United Nations, Syrian refugees residing in Turkey, they stated that the fall of the overthrow of Assad regime was a sine qua non for their return. But this period also coincides with stricter residency permit rules, especially if some of you can remember what happened in Kayseri. There was a big public program against Syrian refugees, an uprising in a way, and the locals in Kayseri attacked Syrian refugees, their shops and houses. So with this development, there was a tighter policy approach to keeping Syrian refugees where they are in Turkey. And also this had a spillover effect on other cities. And there was a crackdown on undocumented migrants. So the Syrian refugees had to move around the country with special permission from the Migration Management Office. So if they lacked one, they would usually be sent to retention centers and then deportation centers. And these measures was framed as necessary by the politicians to manage refugee population in Turkey. And also in this period, in the last period, politicians pledged to prioritize repatriation due to public demand. And although they're not very clear numbers, last week the Interior Ministry announced that only 80,000 Syrian refugees returned. But if you remember the chart I demonstrated before, the numbers decreased from 3.7 million down to 2.8 million. So roughly around 1 million people have returned. And there are not clear data on these returnees. We don't really know where they went back in Syria or if they stayed in Syria further. Because we know that the situation in Syria right now is not safe enough for all of the Syrian refugees to go back. So after providing this background, now I can talk about the Turkish approach to Syrian refugees. It's a multi-layered approach actually. So also the main policy is very centralized. The migration approach to Syrian refugees in Turkey is also highly criticized by the opposition parties because they claimed that it was not really discussed during parliamentary debates. So the issue has been very politicized in one way, but also it has been managed well until now because there hasn't been, very widespread public sort of resentment. I mean, there has been a resentment, but the public reaction has been kept under control quite successfully until now. And the incumbent government played a key role in controlling this dynamic. On the one hand, there has been a continuous discourse which relied on fraternity, a brotherhood between Turkish people and Syrian refugees who shared a common history. But on the other hand, this discourse heavily depended on representing Turkey as a, welcoming host country who sets example to Europe. Also, the politicians of the incumbent government, the president, they also used this refugee card to increase their stakes against the European political actors. So the migration management system in Turkey can be categorized into three parts. in the first part, we can talk about the national actors. And in this level, there are three actors that we can talk of who are mainly responsible for policy making and policy implementation. And one of them is AFAD, the main disaster response unit of Turkey. AFAD has been a leading refugee coordination, but mainly during crisis times, especially before and after, during and after disasters. And throughout this process, it shifted most of its duties to Presidency of Migration Management, previously known as DGMM, Directorate General Migration Management. And right now, the PMM is the main agency, which is connected directly to Ministry of Interior. And also another significant actor is the Kızılay, Turkish Red Crescent, which provides humanitarian support to Syrian refugees and which is a significant actor alongside the southern and eastern border of Turkey. And together with AFAD and Kızılay, the PMM established temporary accommodation centers housing thousands of refugees. However, as I have mentioned before, by 2023, only 63,881 refugees remained in camps. This policy, in a way, reflects a shift towards urban integration. And all of the camps include schools, health centers. We can't really call them hospitals, but some of them are well equipped, so they can be considered as hospitals. And also they have social and sports facilities, receiving some international recognition for high standards. And the previous leader of the UNHCR, Antonio Guterres, praised these camps publicly on various occasions. All right, let me get to the next one. The PMM has a very central role right now in managing Syrian refugees in Turkey, but it is also suffering from various challenges and difficulties. First of all, as a newly established agency with high demands, it had to set up new offices in all the provinces, 81 provinces of Turkey, and it had to recruit new staff and train them, and also teach them about migration acquis of Turkey and the international regime and international law regarding asylum seekers. So these experts, called migration experts, had to face some adaptation challenges. And in an earlier research, which we finished after the COVID outbreak with Professor Tim Jacobi, we came to the conclusion that these difficulties helped migration experts to use some sort of discretion in dealing with new challenges they come up with. And also, after the introduction of the new the new law on international migration, some other regulations had to pass through the parliament because of the lack of a complete system. And there has been a harsh criticism from the EU politicians, and also some EU countries criticized Turkey for not following a strict border policy, especially on the western part of Turkey. And this increased the burden on these migration experts working for the PMM, because they have been usually portrayed as dual workers. On the one hand, they have to serve Syrian refugees, but on the other hand, they have to prove their allegiance to the country. So this process has brought about some challenges, institutional challenges on the PMMs. And in the current project, we are going to dig deeper into this issue and understand how their roles have been affected after the earthquakes. Okay, and now let's talk a bit about the earthquake. As you know, around this time, 2 years ago, two major earthquakes caused damage in an area approximately 350,000 kilometers square, an area roughly the size of Germany, and affected 14 million people. In Turkey, more than 39,000 buildings were destroyed on the first day, while a total of 518,000 homes were either destroyed or heavily damaged across 11 provinces. And if you can see it on the map, the dark red sort of line going upwards to Malatya represents the epicenter of the earthquake, but it affected all 11 provinces around it, including the northwest part of Syria. Cities like Idlib and Aleppo were also badly affected by the earthquake. And after these devastating earthquakes, which affected 11 cities and displaced 2.2 million people in its first week, travel restrictions on Syrians were lifted, allowing them to move around the country freely. And many Syrians were resettled in newly established container shelters and accommodated. Some of them were also accommodated in hotels like the Turkish citizens were. But this was a hard decision to take on the side of policymakers because the public resentment was increased by this decision. Ümit Özdağ and his followers challenged this policy, saying that Turkish citizens should be prioritized over Syrian refugees when it comes to accommodating earthquake victims at hotels. And also, most of the Syrian refugees relocated themselves near their relatives in surrounding cities like Kayseri, Malatya, Ankara, Mersin. But also, we know that most of them went to Istanbul to use this as an opportunity and to find jobs. So this figure roughly shows the difference between the refugee population in earthquake hit areas. So the orange color represents the population of Syrian refugees after the earthquake, and the blue column represents the population of Syrian refugees before the earthquake in each city. And the numbers over the columns represent the difference in percentages. So in our project, we are focusing on Hatay, Kahramanmaraş, and Gaziantep, the three epicenters of the earthquake. And if you can see on the figure, there's around a 40% decrease in the number of Syrian refugees in Hatay, and 12% in Gaziantep, and 10% in Maraş. And in other cities, the difference is wider. Of course, the earthquake cannot account for this difference. We believe that there has been other factors affecting this drop in the number of Syrian refugees in the earthquake hit area. And I think Tim can elaborate on that issue after my presentation. At the local level, Turkish municipalities have played the crucial role in responding to the refugee crisis, most of the time going beyond their responsibilities due to legal and financial constraints, because their budget comes basically from the central government, and the population of each municipality is considered for the amount to be sent from the central government to the municipalities, and refugees are not counted within this population. So municipalities facing the challenge of accommodating hundreds of thousands of refugees, and in cities like Kilis, where I lived before, the refugee population is equal to the local population. There was a great pressure on municipalities. Also, some of them have used this crisis as an opportunity to receive international funds. Most of them have been challenged by the number of Syrian refugees they had to accommodate. Some municipalities like Gaziantep has established migration directorates in cooperation with some NGOs, local NGOs, in coordination with some local NGOs. But many other municipalities have struggled in dealing with the challenges like housing shortages, infrastructure gaps, especially particularly in education and healthcare. Right now, the municipalities of Gaziantep has set up a new model that we are going to look into detail during our fieldwork in this summer. We have already started. A team of researchers have already carried out some interviews in Gaziantep, and I have also conducted some interviews in Kilis and Gaziantep. So we are trying to understand how different Gaziantep's approach is to Syrian refugees compared to other provinces. And finally, if we look at the international level, in the early stages of the crisis, Turkey didn't let any international involvement. It wanted to deal with the issue independently, not seeking any assistance from international organizations or NGOs. Until 2012, UN agencies such as UNHCR were not allowed to operate in refugee camps. But by 2015, when the numbers reached up to 3 million, over 3 million, Turkey recognized the need for international support. Right now, for example, in Gaziantep, only in Gaziantep, there are more than 150 NGOs, and some of them are international NGOs operating locally and providing help to Syrian refugees in Gaziantep and also in northern Syria. So the international involvement in the crisis came about after 2015, roughly. And also there was a lot of effort from the Turkish side to convince EU leaders to support further funding for Turkey. And up to now, 6 billion euros were filled into Turkish economy, but this is, according to Turkish officials, nothing compared to $30 billion that they spent until 2020. And here is a chart that describes roughly the organizational map of migration management in Turkey. So in the first half, you can see the policy making sort of strata of the organizational structure, starting from presidential office and going down to cabinet, parliament, the interior ministry, and the EU, UNHCR, and European Court of Human Rights also is placed within this decision-making part of the organizational map, because it has influenced Turkey to take further steps in terms of finalizing its migration policies, especially the 2013 law on international protection was inspired by the EU. So in the first half, you see the decision-making actors, policymakers, and in the lower part of the map, you can see the implementation part of the organizational structure of migration management. So here, the provincial offices of the PMM, Presidency of Migration Management, take the lead, and they work with municipalities and local NGOs as well. And AFAD and Red Crescent, they always interfere, or I would say get involved in the process whenever there's a crisis, whenever there's an attack from the Syrian side of the border, or whenever there's a disaster like the earthquake in 2023. And the international NGOs also take part in this process by helping either local NGOs directly or in collaboration with municipalities. They address the needs of education, health, and other psychological needs of Syrian refugees. So our project examines Turkey's migration policies in response to the Syrian refugee crisis, and particularly after the earthquake. And we have conducted around 20 interviews until now, and we're planning to conduct more interviews in Kahramanmaraş and Hatay, the epicenter of the earthquake. In the first phase of our project, we aim to understand the evolution of Turkey's recent migration regime with regard to Syrian refugees. And in this second phase of our project, we aim to investigate how GIB, the PMM, and AFAD officials have managed disaster relief, refugee resettlement, and how they have addressed their problems. So the key questions are: how are government policies adopted by local officials post-disaster? How is social integration understood and applied within GIB? And how does GIB coordinate with NGOs, international organizations? And let me remind you again, and apologies that I have used the Turkish abbreviation here. GIB stands for PMM. And finally, how our national migration policies are localized in response to emerging situations. Sorry. Okay. So the project actually departs from the necessity that there is an implementation gap. I mean, the policies are being enacted at the top level, but when it comes to local implementers, there's a dearth of knowledge and dearth of research on how these policies are being implemented by migration experts on the ground, and how they interpret and adapt national policies based on local pressures, like in cities like Hatay, Kahramanmaraş, and Gaziantep. And we use Lipsky's terminology in reference to migration experts as street-level bureaucrats, because in this approach, we believe that the local migration experts are the implementers of Turkey's migration policy, and they shape the real policy that is being implemented on the ground. So we can see that there is a migration policy that is being written down by policymakers at the upper level of decision-making process. But when it comes to reality, these policies have to be adapted, and they have to be adapted particularly in response to the challenges that the cities are facing. The urban challenges and the integration problems necessitate us to investigate how natural disasters affect refugee integration, especially with a focus on housing, identity, and belonging. And we aim to contribute to the policymaking process in Turkey with regard to refugees and migration by providing a fresh perspective to relief and long-term solutions, and the role of PMM and its coordination with other agencies. And also, we aim to bring the voice of civil servants to the foreground as humanitarian actors, which are usually backgrounded by policymakers and even researchers. Okay, now let me close up my presentation with this last page. What lies ahead? First of all, there has been a transition in Turkey's approach to migration management from an ad hoc, ethnicity-based policies to a structured system with legal frameworks and institutional reforms. It was ethnicity-based because until 2013, Turkey lacked a clear migration policy, and the only migration policy it had dated back to 1930s, which was devised to accept Muslim and Turkish origin migrants called muhajirin coming from the Balkan countries. And the Syrian refugee crisis, the 2023 earthquakes, and rising anti-refugee sentiment have led to a shift from integration to border security and voluntary returns. And this is very much in line with the main EU outlook recently. Another significant point is that as both a host and transit country, Turkey faces complex migration dynamics, exemplified by the 2016 EU-Turkey statement and burden sharing asymmetries, because after the Syrian conflict, 6 million people had to flee their country, and 3.7 million back in 2021 resided in Turkey. Now the numbers decreased down to 3 million. So roughly 50% of the Syrian displaced people reside in Turkey. And Turkey also had to deal with the repercussions of the 2023 earthquakes nationally and locally. And disaster response and migration management most of the time intersect in the bordering cities, which are which are hosting high numbers of refugees. So these points highlight the need for adaptive and sustainable policies. And finally, balancing international obligations, domestic realities, and strategic interests remains a key challenge in shaping Turkey's migration governance. And this is all from me. Thank you very much for listening.